Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock here, at least in EST in Toronto, where I'm based, but we'll give everyone a couple of minutes before we get going. So, and we have a few attendees that have already joined. We'll start in a minute or so.
We should have wait music.
That's true.
Sorry, Rich?
Should have a little wait music.
Right, yeah, I know, it is a little bit. It is very quiet, but I'm actually thinking it's a minute and we'll at least get things kicked off with introductions. I know there is a recording of this as well that's going to be posted online. So for any others that are joining, they can always kind of rewind and take a look at the beginning. But the first couple of minutes, it's anyways introduction. So there's not a whole lot for others that are going to join later that'll be missing out on. So first off, everyone, welcome to the Banking in the Cloud, the SaaS Shift in Financial Cybersecurity webinar that KeyData is hosting. We are very pleased to have with us Rhodes, who's the CISO for Choicebank, joining us today. And I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. And then we also have Peter Zubert, who's an IAM Sales Specialist from KeyData Cyber, that's going to be part of this panel discussion. So the overall webinar is about an hour. So we'll start off with about 35, 40 minutes of questions and back and forth with Rich and Peter initially, and then please feel free as we go along to paste any questions that you have or put in the questions in the chat box. And then in the last 15-20 minutes, we'll go over any of the questions that we have from the audience here. Right. So with that, I'll kick things off. Safwan Nathersa, I'm a partner with KeyData Cyber, been doing identity and access management for a little over 18 years now. Started my career first off in consulting, doing one of the largest banks here in Canada, a deployment of their identity and access management, their governance solution. And then over the years, I've done a lot of deployments, consulting, managed services, the whole shebang of services around identity across the entire landscape from banking, financial services, insurance, and others. Right? So really looking forward to the discussion today. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rich for a quick intro.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. So Rich Rhodes, I'm the CISO for Choicebank. Been at Choice now for just about 5 months. From a background perspective, I've been doing IT and information security for about 30 years. I know, 30 years, that's a long time. Started my information security career over at Security and Financial Group over in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I've been in a lot of positions in a lot of different verticals, from manufacturing to retail to banking. And so I'm happy to be here today and have this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rich. Thanks for joining us. And Peter, over to you.
Well, hello. I'm Peter Zubert, and I have been in IT sales delivery for not much delivery, mostly sales for since 2003. And I live in Minnesota. I enjoy biking and drumming. Those are my hobbies. But I've been passionately involved with identity access management since 2016. I was with Klengo, and we focused just only on identity access management. So privilege access management, identity access management, audits, all those sorts of things. And then back in about a year ago, I came to KeyData Cyber, and it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. So with that, we'll dive right in. So starting off with the very first thing that I had and obviously everyone here on this call would also be interested in knowing why is IAM so important in the financial services sector as a whole, but in particular banking, right? And I do want to qualify this a little bit as well, just because IAM is extremely broad and it covers a lot of aspects, everything from lifecycle management of users, non-human accounts that are a lot more prevalent in most organizations, but then also facilitating application access to cloud as well as on-premise applications, either through SSO, as well as implementing incremental second factor authentication like multi-factor and others as well, right? So this one primarily covers some of the core use case around the internal employees side and contractors and consultants that work within a banking institute or a financial institute. And then there's also the privileged access that Peter kind of alluded to. But then there's also the whole other landscape in terms of managing the full customer identity and access management lifecycle, which is basically the customers that access banking institutions and try to access their online banking, their insurance information, and so many others, right? So the focus of today's conversation is primarily going to be focused on the internal aspects, basically employees, contractors, and how identity and access management kind of plays a role from that perspective. I'm sure there will be a few comments and few items that overlay and overlap into customer identity management, but I at least want to relay that initial context to say today's webinar is going to be focused more from an internal standpoint. Again, we can spend an additional hour entirely just on customer identity, but that'll be a webinar for a different time. Right? So with that, I guess I know there's a lot of threats out there, and the threat actors are getting more and more creative in a lot of cases. Rich, I'll go with you first. And pretty much almost every week there is news articles that we see where either through phishing or through some more new creative ways, threat actors have been able to get into the enterprise, right? And especially in financial institutions, obviously the onus is a lot more in terms of securing the enterprise because, well, there is a lot of money involved, very simply, right? So from your experience, Rich, why don't you talk a little bit about what are some of the key threats that identity and access management kind of helps, and some of the importance over your years of experience that you see for a solid IAM program?
Yeah, particularly when we're talking banking and we're talking in the cloud, right? I mean, there's only a handful of vendors, right? So I think that's one interesting thing is there's less than a handful of targets that the malicious actors get to actually go attack and go towards. You know, I think we know FIS, we know Fiserv, Jack Henry, but beyond that, right, I think the space is consolidated down quite a bit. So I think from an IAM perspective, you know, the things that we can control is who in my bank has access, what type of access do they have, ensuring that you have things like separation of duties or segregation of duties covered. And then, you know, in larger banks, we've had to worry about approval limits, right? You know, what does an entry-level teller get to approve versus a senior-level teller, right? What type of transactions or limits do we need to put there? And all those are part of the access landscape that we have to consider, right? And then movers, levers, right? We have all those sorts of things. What happens if someone goes from a teller 1 to a teller 2? What happens in that case? What access changes need to happen? And, you know, in the line of business, they want they want that access to be changed immediately. They don't want to have to put in tickets. So now you're talking about some type of birthright or role-based access built on birthright, right? Properties around the individual, which then you've got to start talking about your HR systems and sources of truth for those details to drive that level of conversation. Then it all comes down to timing, right? The ability to be timely about those changes. Well, how timely is my HR department in making those changes and feeding it to me? If it takes them 3 days, then I've got a problem, right? Now I might have to rely on a ticket. I might have to rely on manual provisioning. I might have to rely on some of those things. So, you know, it's a complex. And then the suite of applications, are they connected? Are they disjointed? So all that adds to the complexity of IAM. And I think at the end of the day, we're talking about the customer and their money, right? Their financial stability. And we can have a great impact on that if we don't do IAM correctly.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially to the points that you mentioned, that also everyone wants the access right away to be able to do their job effectively. But how do you balance that with security, with approvals? Because to your point, Rich, it's not just giving someone in a new role access into something additional just because they got promoted to a new, with a higher limit, let's say, right, in your example. But then what are the controls you have in place, right? And how can you streamline and kind of expedite that to make sure that those users are not waiting for too long, which ultimately impacts being able to service the customer, right? So it's kind of balancing both aspects of things, right?
Yeah.
For sure. Peter, any thoughts on this?
I mean, just in some recent you know prospective customers I've been working with, one thing I did this note is that they're really complex. Even the small and the small and medium sized banks and credit unions, they're much more complex than any other organization their size, and in lots of unique, I guess, legacy sort of application as well. So I think in that environment where you have complexity and users they're sophisticated, right? And when you have that, I think it's just really important to get that that first layer of security down, which I do think is identity, and it requires thought and understanding of your people and your process before you go to picking out solutions.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where I think the examples we spoke, IAM becomes extremely important to be that cornerstone, but also making sure that it supports and enables the business really, right? Ultimately, that's the goal. How can it make the business life easier, but also kind of keeping in mind the security aspects of things. So that's great. Thank you. So in terms of compliance requirements, and I suppose this is most relevant to you, Rich, just based on your banking experience, how have compliance requirements changed over the last 10 years? What are you seeing as compared to before? Is it more stringent? Is it more lax? Is it just a lot more different sets or different views from a requirement standpoint that you need to address? Again, having dealt with regulators, can you talk a little bit about what you've seen in terms of changes?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? And banking is well known for its regulations, right? And everything from red flags programs, IAM, et cetera. I'd say there's a couple of things, right? The separation of duties, right? It used to be, did we get access approved by someone? Did we provision it? And then did we run an access review, right, as a secondary control? Well, that isn't good enough anymore. Do you have separation of duties controls to ensure that that teller can't do the wrong thing, right? That's a conflict of interest. I also found it interesting because we just recently had a visit from our regulatory friends, and one of the examiners highlighted the fact that yes, access is approved, access is provisioned. Yes, you do an access review. How do you know that that access that was provisioned was correct? Right, which is a leading question to, do you have an IGA solution, right? Do you have something in place to really monitor that the ask and what was done, the activity, are the same, right?
Right.
And that was the first time
the two, right?
Yeah, well, and then it's the first time I've had a regulator ask that question, right? And I would say us in the IAM industry have been begging for our regulators to kind of help give us some momentum for some of these things, particularly in smaller banks and credit unions. If you've got 200 people, an IJ solution automatically doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Particularly the legacy ones that we've all come to know. And I know that we'll be talking about kind of new solutions and
solutions, right?
Yeah, but yeah, at the end of the day, I think there's an expectation starting to form within the regulators that, hey, we do need to have something to plug the gap, or we need to have a new secondary control, right? Access reviews can't be the secondary; it's got to be the third line control in a sense.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're bang on there, right? When I started doing this in 2008, 2009, unless you're at least 5,000 plus from an organization standpoint, it made no sense to invest in an IAM solution because there are so many manual ways that you could do it for much cheaper, much more efficiently without having to invest a whole lot. But obviously things have changed a whole lot in the last 16, 17 years. And again, the ability for to be able to prove some of these regulatory requirements, which a lot of your banking licenses and some of the core fundamental ability to do business is also contingent on, it does become more and more important to kind of be able to leverage some sort of IAM platforms, right? So
yeah, and I think another item that likely will be coming is particularly with the banking core in the cloud, is what contractual requirements do you have? Because again, you don't have the visibility anymore, right? By signing that contract with said SaaS provider, you've
right.
given up the control, right? So what is the contractual language you have in place? How are you ensuring that they're monitoring the logins, right? Or the login attempts and the MFA and all the things that, right? We're seeing a lot of the SaaS providers, I would say generally, right? We can throw out names like Snowflake and others,
Right.
but right, that have had breaches. But the reality is I'm expecting the regulators to start coming back with those questions, right? And in many cases, the answer is no. I've given that control.
Given everything to them.
Yeah.
Right.
And we can go, and sometimes it's not easy to go get those conversations had with those providers, right? To have this technical. So how do you do that in a regulated environment and give comfort to your regulators? Give comfort to yourself from a security program perspective. There's basics of whitelisting. I can whitelist for my internal employees, right? But I know we're not talking about customers, but there's still the customer aspect of how is that being managed? How is that being monitored? How is that being correlated, right? To know that this employee or this customer isn't going to go log in from the Philippines on the regular, and we should somehow call that out and implement some other level of control there, or MFA, to ensure that they are who they say they are.
That you have the controls in place.
I'm expecting that to be coming.
Right. So from an accountability standpoint, Rich, assuming the accountability still lies with you as the organization, right? Even though you have completely outsourced it, to be able to prove that at least you have all of the building blocks or bricks in place to make sure that the service is being provided within the confines of what's been set up, right?
Yeah, versus hoping legal did a really good contract.
Right.
Right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's a risk that you have. You are, in a sense, outsourcing that risk via the contract, but your contract language better be pretty good. And at the end of the day, as you said, I think the regulators are still going to look at you to say, how are you getting comfortable with this?
Right. Yeah.
And we've got to start formulating that story, because I think they'll be asking that question soon.
Absolutely. It actually leads into my next question, which is about meeting regulatory audits. And I know you gave some examples already, but can you share, again, for the viewers here, what, in your experience, has enabled you to be successful, right? What are some of the things that you do? Because obviously having the controls itself in place, that's great, but how do you prove it to them, right? What are some of the things that you've used in the past, leveraging IAM technologies and otherwise, to be able to give them that satisfaction to say, you know what, Rich, this is great. I'm very, very comfortable with what I'm seeing, right? So can you share a little bit of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the more role-based access that you can build out, and the more you can birthright that based on some form of or some subset of HR metadata, I think the better, right? And getting business alignment around that, them getting comfortable. Then, of course, because it's role-based access, you're doing some level of role review. You're also making the review easier for the manager, right? Should Rich be in this role? Yes or no, right? And no, let's produce a list. What role should they be in, right? And the ability to have that track through completion, I think, is highly important. And I think at the end of the day, when you have that level of sophistication, the regulators get very comfortable, right? Because they've showed that you've thought through. Now, some may come back and go, well, aren't you over provisioning?
Right.
Well,
Yeah. Basically.
maybe in a couple of areas, but none that are financially impacting for my customer, right? My banking core is solid, right?
Right.
Maybe a little over provisioned on the SharePoint side, but no one's going to have heartache over that, right? So I think, again, as you think through the suite of the applications, as you think about your core, those are important things to be thinking through. And again, what is the truly important things and what are the things that maybe aren't as important? Again, you still can do RBAC. I know at my time at TCF Bank, which doesn't exist anymore, we had a full RBAC model built out for all of the high turnover positions, right? Which was made up almost 60% of the bank. And role changes, all that stuff was automated. So yeah, if Peter took a new position, went from a teller 1 to a teller 2, he had the access right away as that came in the HR feed. We had an agreement with HR how quickly that had to come. And so all that stuff was pretty immediate. It was seamless. No one was putting a ticket in. No one was doing anything. At the end of the day, the regulator's like, this is good.
This is great.
Right? But you've thought through the whole picture, right? You didn't stop halfway through. You didn't leave gaps. And I think at the end of the day, it's that sort of work that we have to do. Without an IGA solution, it is harder, right? But as I've told people in the past, you give me a spreadsheet, I can do a VLOOKUP pretty good. I can filter pretty good. And, I think there's easier solutions for that stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's more managing, maintaining it as well, right? To do it one time, it's great, but then how do you keep this live? Because I'm sure every 2 or 3 months there's a new system that's coming online, and now especially with the cloud, it's probably more frequent than that, where a business area is like, I really need this platform, I need to go get it, and then now that's an additional block, right, which you need to add from a robot standpoint.
It can be, but it can also be great. You want to go fast, but I've got to go talk to 26 role owners to tell me if they need this app in the role, right?
Right.
And do you need it? Yes or no? And so level of access, right? Again, we can build the pattern, right? Whether it's manual or automated
process, right?
But it's that level of conversation that has to happen, right? And I think where security has failed or IAM has failed is when they kind of buckle to that conversation, right?
Right.
And just throw it in and not go, no, give me a day, give me 2 days to go send off an email and get some understanding. So at least, again, we can try to figure out who should.
Right. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I've always said technology is 20% of the overall solution to the problem. 80% of it is how you designed it, the process, right? So as long as you have the process robust, again, we can make, like I said, do it manually, but make any of the solutions that we have fit as well, right? And again, it all depends on scale too, right? Again, with manual, there's always a risk of potential issues, and things like that, right? So it's really kind of more automating and streamlining.
And I'll just state, the smaller you are, easier those conversations are, right?
That's
because
true.
you're not dealing with 90 roles if you're a 150 person credit union, right?
Right.
250 person credit, you're not dealing with that. You're dealing with 30, dealing with 20, right? So I would say the smaller you are, the more agile you can be in that. And again, you can really start doing it right, such that when growth comes in the future, you have your pattern built, you have your processes built, and then now it's just repeating and pumping new applications into that same pipeline.
You kind of scale up, right? So yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. And sorry, Peter, I know you're like getting a little bit left out. So the next question is for you.
This is great. No,
this was around regulations, and again, I wanted to set the context as to where and how IAM solutions can help as well, right? So obviously, just talking about, Peter, from your experience, having worked with identity and access management solutions over at least the last decade, if not longer, how have solutions evolved in general, right? And how have these provided the opportunity for you as you have conversations with customers to kind of talk about how it can help address their compliance needs? And obviously, as we said here, we're not talking about large banks, which already have had platforms for 10, 15 years. We're talking about smaller banks and credit unions, which maybe few hundreds, few thousands of employees. And what kind of shift in the landscape in the product vendor arena has really helped you sell solutions that make sense, right, for these smaller banks and financial credit unions?
Well, I'm really interested to hear what Rich has to say. That's because Rich, I think you might have been one of my first customers back in the olden days, the olden days, like 5 years ago. And things have changed a lot. And of course, if you're in this business, it's a wild ride, right? Software manufacturers have to continue to evolve and justify their existence, really. And what I've seen, and what I've noticed is trying is that they're really trying to help with the automation of tasks that this kind of points back at what you guys were just talking about. Just really trying to automate what they can so that they can get a better return on investment with the product. So back to what you're talking about, role-based authentication or role-based access controls. And I was just asking Rich about this, like, can you go out and into the organization and predict what roles should be, right? And can you automate onboarding and offboarding and those sorts of things? And I think when you have your people and process in place, you can do that, right? When you understand your organization. The cool part is that the software manufacturers are pushing for that. They are trying to do that. The other thing that's really changed, and it's been an interesting shift, is all of the non-human identities and kind of where that's going and how does that fit into the big picture. One of the things I noticed a few years ago was that the conversation kept coming up with customers. I recall a big healthcare organization in Chicago. We were talking like, yeah, we understand we have all these service accounts, all these non-human identities, and how are we going to deal with the problem? And I don't feel like we really had a good answer. And the product manufacturers didn't. And now it seems like they're really going after that. So it's kind of like, this known issue, this known vulnerability that everybody was trying to solve but couldn't solve for, or it wasn't worth the money, and it seems like it is now. So you're seeing the big IGA vendors say, yeah, we're going to go after non-human identities. And then, some of the PAM vendors, they also have been going after that for a while as well. So I think those are kind of two big shifts I've seen. And then, of course, the consolidation, having been in this for a while, knowing that Oracle, was trying to be an all-in-one IAM vendor, 8 years ago or whatever, and they were doing it, right? But all of a sudden they're like, no, we don't want to do that anymore. So here comes SailPoint and, all the other vendors, Savient, and they come along and they're like, yeah, well, we're going to do that now. And now they're all trying to consolidate again. So I just think it's a fascinating cycle. And I guess if you live long enough, you get to see these things. So that's my observation.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add on to that. I think there's been a couple of things. One, you've had as Peter said, previous couple of years, the shrinking of the marketplace, right? Thoma Bravo was out buying almost every identity company they can buy, right?
That's true.
And you've got Palo Alto now just buying CyberArk, right? Because, hey, we don't want to be just a hardware, we want to be a subscription, right? Security player. So there was a lot of that. And I would say that's, smaller companies, smaller banks, credit unions, they struggled because there weren't a lot of solutions for them, right? Give me something that's reasonable. I don't have $300,000 a year in subscription maintenance I can go pay. I don't have 2 developers I can pay to go build out an IGA solution. It doesn't work. I think what's interesting in the past year is the new startups that are coming out, and they are truly trying to go after the legacy model of being so expensive. I mean, you can go buy a viable PAM solution today for $5,000-$6,000 that does rotation, checkouts, everything. Mm-hmm. There are new IGA solution providers out there that say, hey, you don't need developers. Tell me which 30 apps you want integrated, and I'll go build the integrations for you. There are solutions coming out going, hey, I can do API integrations, I can do RPA integrations, right? Because banking's known for terrible software half the time, right? That can't even spell SSO, let alone provide SSO. All of a sudden, now you've got these providers who, for less than $100,000 a year, are saying, hey, I'll onboard every application you want. And if that's an API integration, great. If it has to be RPA, great. And oh, by the way, we'll continue to maintain it, right? Something breaks, we'll be able to know as soon as it breaks. We'll be able to fix it. Like, that's amazing, particularly for small businesses, right? To be able to say for a 5-digit number, not a large 6-digit number.
Right.
I can bring in the capability, the automation, the integration, even of the terrible applications, and now really provide kind of big bank functionality to my line of business, even at a smaller bank or a credit union, right?
I think
But
that's
interesting to see that.
and that's always been the biggest challenge, even historically, right? Even if you spend a whole lot of money, there's always these systems, especially in banking, right? You have these mainframes, you have these very proprietary platforms and technologies that are extremely difficult to integrate, right? So being able to get a fully integrated solution kind of ready to go, because ultimately those are your crown jewels at the end of the day. Right? It's the core banking systems. It's okay, like I said, if you don't manage SharePoint groups within 80, okay, sure, it's a problem, but not a big deal. But if you're not managing the core banking application in terms of who has access to it and what limits, that's a bigger issue, right? So I think no, absolutely. I think that those are great observations there. So I have to ask this one just because I mean, every time I open the news, it's all about AI, right? So I know SaaS, evolution of SaaS, the whole consolidation and all of that, absolutely over the last 5, 7, 10 years, we've seen that. But pretty much, at least, I guess it's really what, from the advent of ChatGPT, November of last year, maybe in the last 9 months, it seems forever. But in the last 9 months, their solutions and even our IAM vendors, right? A lot of them have come out with feature sets with recommendations that look at historic access and provide automated approvals, right? Like if you take attestations, for example, there are vendors that are already doing automated attestations on your behalf. You still have to go sign off on it because ultimately, to your point, Rich, no matter AI or whoever does the work, the accountability still has to be with an individual, at least as of today. 50 years from now, we don't know, right? Maybe it's a robot called Robot Rich that does that, but as of today, it has to be a human. So from that perspective, obviously, I want to hear from you how you've seen AI, or I know it's still in its infant stages, what you've seen with AI kind of come to the fore, and how do you see that evolving and helping make the IM pieces a lot more seamless or better, right?
Yeah, I think the short answer is there has been no real AI solution yet. Again, I expect it to be coming. I think there are some vendors out there that had some form of, hey, we can try to do some analysis for you, kind of automated analysis to say, hey, here's what your role should be for this application and that application and at the department or business line level. And I think with AI, right, it was such a buzzword. If you didn't have it somewhere on a slide or in your speak, you were going to be left out. So I think they just threw AI on top of some of that existing functionality because there's no way they went and developed anything like that fast. Particularly for some of the bigger players out there that were right private and just got moved to public, like there's just too much transition for some of that stuff to happen. But I do expect it to be coming, right? And I've had some conversations with some providers of recent, and they do have some of that. And what they're doing is they're using that AI to say, hey, you've reviewed this access before. You deemed it was appropriate last year. We think it's appropriate now. Or, hey, when you reviewed it, something's changed, right? Here's what's changed. We still think it's appropriate, but right, to your point, the end user still has to make that decision. I think the day that the end user or a person doesn't have to make the decision is the day that Skynet's officially taking over. And then maybe we should all worry, but I think we're a long ways away from that at this point. But I do see that sort of stuff coming, right? And I think, Peter, you brought up, and I know, Safwan, we weren't going to talk about non-human, but just touching on that, right? The non-human thing came up because of cloud, right? In AD, we may have had 1,000 service counts. In the cloud, I've got 10,000 keys and tokens rolling around, right? And so it just got exponential. And so, yeah, we had to take a look at it. I think there's probably a place for AI there, right, to do some of that investigation. Some of that exists in tools like CSPM tools to take a look at, hey, you haven't rotated this key in 2 years or you haven't done that. So I think some of that's part of there, but I think there's still more from a pure security play to touch off on some of that. But at the end of the day, from an IAM perspective, I really think it's going to be a role based, right? And the access review piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I suppose we'll leave it as more to come on this one and see as things evolve. But of course, there's a lot of intelligence that has started to see, even like you said, right, mostly based on historic decisions, and even I think going back to the role-based access control that you defined earlier, right? Which if it's part of a role, if it's already been approved, then again, having like 3, 4, 5 different checks doesn't really make sense. How can AI help automate those aspects of things, right? So you don't need to have to go through those. And again, I do see a lot of those helping from an audit and compliance standpoint as well.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine being able to go sign a contract, bring in one of these new IGA solutions for $50,000, $90,000, have them go integrate your top 30 applications in the first 3 months, and then say, okay, by application, what should the roles be? Right?
Right. Yeah.
Having an AI capability to go do that analysis and go, hey, do I agree? Let me go talk to the line of business. Do they agree? Yep. Sweet. Now I've got roles built in all 30 applications. Hey, if I combine all that, can I build some business line roles based on some logic? Mm-hmm. Hey, yes, but there's some unicorns, right? Go have the conversations on the unicorns, make decisions, and boom, now you're done, right? That would be huge. And having all that then be automated on day one would be amazing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So kind of moving on, just in terms of new, smaller and medium-sized financial institutions that are just in the process of looking to stand up an IAM platform, right? So what is a typical journey in getting started for organizations that don't necessarily have an IAM program in place? And they have a whole bunch of homegrown platforms that you need to integrate with, and I know we spoke about some of those earlier, but whether they are starting new or whether they are migrating from a legacy platform, as you mentioned that they have, or a homegrown platform, what did that journey look like, right? So I guess, Peter, I'll let you talk to it first, maybe in terms of highlighting what's a typical timeline that they can expect to be able to stand up a platform, to be able to get that up and running. And Rich already gave a bit of a sneak peek into some of the pricing too with some of the more agile and net new vendors, but just want to understand what's the timing look like, how can they expedite and use the foundation of tens and hundreds of deployments that you have supported, right, to be able to use that as a base to help them get on the journey much faster as opposed to them having to go through a learning experience.
Yeah, and that's a good question, and that's that's the challenge that we've been tackling, at KeyData Cyber, and I'm sure not just us, but across the industry, obviously. How do we help, right? And Rich mentioned, there's new applications, there's new vendors, right, in that space that they're taking one angle, and I think with some of the vendors that have been around for a while, they're also going after it, and we're working with them on that as well. So I guess the conversations we've been having really it's about 3 months, right? You identify some specific crown jewels up front, and in about 3 months you can get a foundation put together. But every organization is so different. I think setting the expectation to be fully implemented, is still taking a while. I think that some of the things that we're seeing that seem to help are pre-built connectors, or like Rich was talking about, where the connectors are known up front, and it's not like, oh, you've got the solution now. Oh, now we're gonna have to custom code all these connectors, right? It's there, and also some of the thing we've been talking about obviously too is automating some of the identity governance. And I think Rich, you just gave a great example of how you might do that, right? And so and then obviously I think working with looking ahead and saying, okay, who's done this before? What works, what doesn't work, what are all the different types of anomalies have you seen in all the different organizations you've worked with, and working with a provider that can do that sort of analysis for you up front, and having a conversation and workshopping it up front versus just saying, oh, we're going to buy a solution and solve the issues, and we've got a person internally and they're really smart, and so we're going to have them figure it out. I've just never seen that work in 10 years. So, I really, maybe it's because I work for a consulting firm, but I really think, there's a lot of great free information up front that you can access to figure out the right moves to make, the best practices. And of course, it always comes back to people, process, and technology. Always. And, and a lot of organizations need to look at their people and process before they really start to think about technology and really understand it. And so that's where, whenever I get the chance to have that conversation, it's exciting for me. And so that's what I would say.
Yeah. And I'll just expound on that. I mean, I've worked for a company in the past where required fields, start date, department, cost center, wouldn't be populated, right? So before you bring in a tool, you got to have all the conversations with your HR department to say, can we get agreement, right? Data is going to be accurate. Data is not going to change. I had that too, where it's like, oh, they're going to be in the marketing department, and then 2 days before they start, they moved over to finance. That's a big change, everybody. And if we're not automating that, that's a huge change. And so you really got to have those kind of working agreements with your business partners first.
Mm-hmm.
Got to have conversations around employees versus contractors versus consultants. What is the access model going to look like? I even in a past company, we had to work with the IT team because the office license we assigned would be different for an employee versus a contractor versus a consultant. It would be different for the first week and a half before they started versus just after that, right? Because if I can save 20 bucks, 30 bucks, right, for this one person for this month, why not do that, right? Mm-hmm. And so as all those become the requirements then that you've got to be able to fulfill as you're implementing a tool. Peter, you mentioned about knowing, what connectors are available. I have found with most of the third parties I've been talking with as of recent, they just want the list. Get them the name. They'll go find 95% of that, right? Because in many, it's 2025, right? If someone has an API available, it's usually they tell everybody on the internet, right? So a lot of that stuff is already there if it exists, right? It's for the stuff where those connections don't exist, and it have to be more manual or RPA type focused. I think those get to be the harder ones. But I also find that those aren't running your core in many cases. Maybe some critical functions, but generally not your core. So yeah, I think, before you go off and do something like that, you've got to go through the use cases. And then what happens if there's a failure? What happens if my partner who's agreed to be 100% all the time has a mistake, right? What are you going to do? How do you want it to respond? Do you want it to create a ticket? Do you want it to create alert? Do you want it to try again? Like all those things. How often are you going to do a sync with HR? So once a day, twice a day, 10 times a day? What are the implications of that, right? You may find that HR puts it in, but maybe they do make changes in the first 2 hours, and maybe you don't want that data that often. Those are all the things you got to consider before you bring in an IGA solution in your environment.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Peter, why don't you talk a little bit about ISaaS? I know you're seeing a lot of traction and interest in that. Again, not to take too much time, but if you want to spend 30 seconds on kind of letting everyone know what an ISaaS service is and how that will help, right, in this conversation about getting platforms stood up really fast and getting value and speed to market, really.
Yeah, I mean, the big hesitation for, small and medium-sized organizations is like, it's a big lift, right? And to do an IAM solution. And I don't think it's small by any means now, but what we've done with ISaaS and the software manufacturers that are leaders in the industry, they've understood that there's this segment of business that we're not getting because we're too big and clumsy, right? And so, we've worked with them, and so now they've and it's the same product, right? But we've just been able to package that into a monthly payment, really, right? So there's no big upfront downstroke to get started. We know the 3-month effort it's going to take to get you up and running. We map that all out ahead of time. And I'm not just saying we. By we, I mean we're not the only ones doing this, but this is what we're doing. So we package this. We own the software. We manage the solution. So what's nice for, again, organizations that are smaller, they don't have to be like, oh, who's going to run this thing, or how are we going to maintain it, or what are we? They don't have to answer that question completely. Obviously, you can't just let go of the reins completely, but it's very very packaged that way. So it's the implementation of that solution, it's the ongoing support of that solution, and the licensing, and very cost effective, and we're ready to do it. I think the industry is ready to do it now. I think it's just taken a while for us to get there. And obviously, the legacy, I'll call them legacy, or the larger IAM platform providers are saying we've got to do this because of the software, folks that Rich is talking about, and I know who they are too. And if they want to stay in the game, or they want to be in the game, they got to do that. So we're excited that we can bring this to a whole new whole new segment of customers, and especially in the financial space where there is so much complexity. There are so many regulatory challenges, and you know what, we also see it's really hard to find skilled IAM people, and it is hard. So we help with that need as well. So I don't know if that's a good description, but that's the best I got. You want to add anything to that, Safwan?
I was just gonna say it's truly a hands-off approach, right? From a customer standpoint, and especially small and medium-sized organizations, the biggest challenge that we always hear about is lack of resources, lack of ability to be able to kind of take that and run. I think the biggest advantage of ISaaS is it's a truly fully packaged service with pre-built use cases, pre-built ones that, again, can be tailored to your particular requirements. But to the conversation that we've been having here throughout this discussion, a lot of the use cases, I'd say 75-80% of the use cases are fairly common. There would be a nuance or two where some organizations have specific use cases where they need to manage 2 different types of personas at the same time in different roles. So those are some of the things that can definitely be tweaked, but at least laying the foundation, being able to use a CAN service ready to go, helps you really be up and running. And to the conversation that we've been having here, right? How can you meet your compliance mandates effectively and as soon as possible? So if you have audit requirements that you're looking to meet, within 3 months, you can be ready to be up and running and be able to start reporting and be able to share that information with auditors, right? So
as you bring that up, I think the other thing is just knowing your controls. What controls are being expected of you? What controls do you need to have? Which ones do you have to find? Ensuring that those controls can be met, whether you're bringing it in yourself or you're going to go down the ISaaS route.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Always start with the requirements and make sure you're able to map it to the technology, right? Never buy the technology and hope to make it tailor-made fit for what you're looking to do. I know we've been talking a lot about IGA, ISaaS, and the integrations, but I kind of wanted to divert a little bit for one quick question on SSO. And this was interesting for me, so I do want to bring this one up because this was the first time, I think, Rich, when you and I were talking about this webinar a couple of weeks back, you said there's something called an SSO wall of shame. And I was like, what is that? Let's talk a little bit about that. So I'll turn it to you to kind of share your experience over the years with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've literally sat with vendors talking about SSO, and the account people like, I don't know what you mean. SAML, can you spell that? It's real, right? And I think the SSO wall of shame highlights software vendors still put a premium on security. And I think in 2025, we as a larger community can't stand up for that. Like we have to stand up against that and say it's too important. It's too important for me to and my customers and our data to not have basic security controls in place. Again, we know of all of the SaaS providers out there that have had some form of breach because they didn't have MFA. Or don't have or in this case, the SSO wall of shame. Let me charge you a 700% premium to be able to do SSO. That's crazy. That doesn't make sense. I said the same thing about Jamf recently when I found out you couldn't block USB with base Jamf. You had to go to their security version of Jamf. I'm like, what are we doing? Security stuff we've been doing for a long time. So I think as a larger kind of business community, we need to stand up and just start saying no. SSO, it's bread and butter. Encryption is bread and butter. MFA is bread and butter. And until we can start doing that across the board, large and small, I think companies are going to continue to see it as optional, see it as a potential revenue chain, something. So I'll get off the high horse.
Thank you for that, Rich. I think that was definitely very helpful and eye-opening, and I agree with you 100%, right? I think in today's day and age, they are standard enterprise SSO solutions that you should be able to integrate with into any SaaS service without any premium, right? That's a basic API. But I've had a lot of similar conversations across the board with applications or SaaS applications in particular charging a huge premium to be able to expose the API to be able to integrate and call and provision, right? And I was like, really? That's a basic service. So if you're doing it within the application to expose it externally to a central SaaS service to be able to do that, why is it a premium, right? It should never be, right? These integrated platforms as a whole has to be the norm overall, right? And that applies to SSO, that applies to IGN across the board, right? So
I had one try to charge me $100,000 a year to get their access reports, so we could do access reviews. Again, none of this, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Sounds good. Sorry, one last question. I know we're pretty much at time here. So what is the most important thing that most banks and financial institutions are looking for, Rich, in your experience, in terms of service offerings, considering all the risks out there, right? So what are 2-3 things that you would say that anyone, right, that's looking to start on a journey needs to ask the vendors and say, do you offer these 3-4 things that I need, right, absolutely, to get going?
Yeah, and I think there's, again, depending on your size, right? I've worked for very large banks that spent millions for implementation and have them fail, right? And it wasn't the tool, it was the partner. I think for small banks and credit unions, I think it's, again, what are the capabilities? What are the SLA? As I've talked about some of those providers I've been talking to recently, it's like, what is your financial viability? Right? As you start looking at startups, right? I don't need to go implement you and have you go away in 9 months. What's your funding source? How far out in the future are you funded right now? It's those sort of conversations are really needed. You got to have the conversations around where's the data going to live? Is it my cloud, your cloud? How are we doing that? And if it's your cloud, again, what are the controls in place? I don't need a breach of your systems, and because the API integrations, you were somehow able to reset everyone's password, and now bad guys are off logging in as all my people into said application and taking data, right? I don't need that. So really looking at your full set of security program and controls that you want in place, is that third party really going to be able to meet that? That's going to be important at the end of the day. Capabilities become secondary to that conversation first.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Peter, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm back. My computer decided to take a break. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, just from my perspective is, we and I am always trying to make, focus internally on the organization and say, whatever we're doing here in this space is, are we focusing on the customer, and are we focusing on the internal customer and the organization to understand, who they are and how they want to be in the marketplace, and then provide solutions that, that fit that. And I think, what people are looking for is they want their jobs to be simple, but they also want to be secure, and that takes the insight that someone like Rich, has in terms of the experience and the time he spent doing it, and someone like yourself as well, Safwan. So that's where my focus is. Yeah, that's what I would say.
All right, sounds good. This is great. Any questions from, actually, I don't even know what to call it, from the team that's listening in? Or feel free to use the chat to ask any questions while you have Rich. Others? I have the Q&A popping up here. All right, I have one question. If you had to prioritize one identity initiative for your bank in the next 12 months, what would it be and why? Rich, I guess Peter doesn't work for a bank, so sorry, Peter. Not to.
I think the big thing for me is I need to bring more automation and more role-based access, right, into our bank.
Mhm.
Again, we started off as a small community bank, and we've expanded different lines of business and have grown, particularly in asset size. And with that, we need to bring more automation. Again, just to meet the regulator requirements. While we may look like a small bank at the asset size, we're not. And so we have new regulations or regulation expectations that we need to start meeting. So going back to our regulator friends being in recently, yeah, we had some good, healthy conversations. So,
got it. Now, how much of the regulations kind of drive what you're looking to do, Rich? And again, it's more a follow-up to the question that was already asked, but from my own perspective, right? So how much of it is your own roadmap that you've defined, identified versus driven by regulators? Is it a healthy balance between the two in terms of what do you do and what?
absolutely. I've always said that if you're doing the right thing security-wise, you're going to meet any regulation or audit
That
expectations.
comes in anyways, right?
So do the right thing from a security perspective. Now, regulators may always come in. Like if they decide to start saying, sorry, you need to have an IGA solution, manual provisioning isn't optional. Well, great. I always said they're my friends then because they're now writing a ticket that I get to go to leadership and say, hey, you got to find the money.
Right.
A non-optional sort of conversation. But again, I don't want regulators driving anything I'm doing, right? Sitting on my hands and waiting for that. I want to try to get ahead of that because again, good security should be the first thing we do. And then, right, if they come off and want something to be more automated than manual, that's fine.
Got it. Yeah, I'm sure everyone listening would be interested in this as well, but how have you been successful in getting funding internally, barring auditors or regulators coming at it, right? Because that's easy then. You're trying to address something that the regulator is asking for you to do, but then outside of that, proactively, like you mentioned, right? If you're putting a roadmap, what are some of the things you've used? And we'll start with this question. Rich, any thoughts on that?
I'm sorry. I got pinged on the side. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, and I was saying, how have you been successful in getting funding approved internally outside of regulators asking you to do something, right? So,
yeah, I mean, it's talking to your partners, your lines of business, right? In a very manual environment, the line of business has to put in a lot of tickets. They have to know a lot about the access everyone needs. Because as soon as they put in the ticket and say, hey, we hired Rich and we want to have the same access as Peter, you're going to have a decision to make, right? You're going to say, no, we need to do better than that. Or you're going to say yes, and then you're going to have a poor security, right? Go back to the security things. Are you doing the right things from a security perspective? So all that to be said, I found working with the line of business, bringing the promise of automation, bringing the promise of not having to continue to hire, continue to replace, continue to train. I think those are all things that help drive the business case for bringing in tools and solutions.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Rich, and thank you for taking the time today. This was a great discussion. Hopefully everyone listening in found it beneficial as well. So once again, Rich, Peter, thank you so much for your time. And with that, we'll call this a wrap.
Great.
Have a good
Thank you
afternoon.
so much.
Thanks
Thank you
all.
all. Bye-bye.
Later.